What are some ways to get out hunting that don't require specialized gear or years and years of experience? We're going to talk about it today on the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Hello, everybody. Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. You know, if you're new to hunting, you may be a little overwhelmed by all that goes into it. You've got the logistics, you've got the meat care, you've got the strategy of finding the animals, and it may feel like you're never really going to get to a point where you can do all of those things successfully. And I often hear from people who are interested in hunting but haven't gone hunting before that they just don't know how to field dress an animal, or they don't know what they would do with all that meat when they're thinking about going deer or elk hunting. And so it doesn't seem like something that they are going to get into because they just don't have that knowledge and they don't have someone to teach them. But the thing is, hunting doesn't have to be that way. There's actually a lot of hunts out there that are very simple to do and don't require a lot of gear. They don't require a lot of knowledge beforehand. Certainly, you'll learn things and become a better hunter, but there are very minimal barriers to entry. And just about anybody who has some outdoors experience and just normal hiking boots can get into these types of hunting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 4 specific hunts that require minimal gear, that are a lot of fun, and are open to many people across the country. And if you're a new hunter or you're looking to bring someone hunting for the first time, these are a great place to start. These types of hunts will help you develop your skill as a hunter, help you learn to field dress and process animals on a very small, very manageable scale. And over time, you'll build your confidence and likely get further into the hunting lifestyle. Before we get into it today, if you enjoy this podcast or if you've learned something new, please take a moment to follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. That will help the podcast grow and help more people get outside and into hunting, which is what Persistence Outdoors is all about. And if you're feeling especially generous or you have a friend who you think this information could help, please share a podcast with someone you know. That will also help the podcast grow and get in front of more people. So thank you so much for your support, and let's get into our topic for today. All right, before I tell you which hunts I chose, I want to tell you my criteria for choosing these. So first of all, I wanted to make sure that these are hunts available on public land. Not everybody has access to private land, of course, and so I want these to be applicable for a wide range of people who can just drive out to the nearest public land and go hunting. The second criteria was that there are minimal gear requirements. There are some types of hunting that can be super fun and enjoyable, but to get into it, you need a lot of gear. I think of duck hunting and waterfowl hunting as a classic example. Generally, you need some sort of waders or a boat to be able to retrieve ducks. Maybe you need a dog. Most waterfowl hunters are going to use decoys, and all of that together can create a very gear-intensive pursuit. So the hunts that I chose use really only your hiking boots, your normal hiking gear, and some sort of weapon. And you can certainly get specialized gear for these hunts, but it's not a requirement starting out. The third criteria was that these hunts are strategically simple. There are hunts out there that are going to be very challenging just because of the nature of the animal. So I think of spot and stalk bear hunting. I guess the strategy is somewhat simple, but actually locating a bear can be very challenging. And for someone who hasn't hunted before, it could be very discouraging very quickly. And it'd be hard to know if you're doing it correctly. But these hunts that I've chosen are strategically pretty straightforward and are a good introduction to finding animals and hunting. The fourth criteria I used was that there is a high likelihood of success, or at least a high likelihood that you'll have an opportunity to take a shot at an animal. There's a couple reasons for this. First of all, I want it to be fun and I want you to have some early success so you can kind of feel what it's like and get even more hooked on hunting. And then secondly, it's tough when you go hunting and don't have any sort of success because you don't have any moment to pull the trigger and then you don't learn what you do after you take the shot. And those are also important parts of hunting. So having an animal that gives you lots of shot opportunities is going to give you many moments where you have to make a decision and pull the trigger. And then you're also going to have to learn about retrieving the animal and field dressing, even on a very small scale, and then taking care of the meat. And I think that's all important, and those are interesting parts of the hunting process as well. And then my fifth criteria was that the hunts are logistically simple. Not everybody is ready to kill an elk and take it apart and hike it out of the woods. Not everybody is ready to spend 2 weeks out there looking for that perfect mule deer, whatever it is. So I just wanted hunts where you could go out for a couple hours in the morning or a couple hours in the evening, and it would be really simple and straightforward. If you think about the criteria for a moment, we can pretty quickly narrow it down to small game. So I wanted to choose a small game animal for different regions of the country. And originally I was thinking like, oh, Northwest, Midwest, the South, maybe the Southwest. But that got a little too confusing or particular. So I decided to choose animals based on different types of habitats. And there's certainly crossover between these species and hunts. But I think with this method, we'll cover opportunities for most people throughout the US. All right, so what are my picks? Well, for deciduous forests, I chose squirrel hunting. For mixed conifer forests, I chose grouse hunting. For open farmland and grasslands, I chose pheasant hunting. And for high desert areas, I chose chukar hunting. And then turkey hunting gets an honorable mention, and I will touch on that towards the end. So let's start with squirrel hunting. Squirrels are abundant throughout the US. In many different forests, you can find gray squirrels in particular. You can also find fox squirrels and red squirrels. And red squirrels actually live in coniferous forests. I think it's a little bit less popular to hunt them. So we're really going to focus on gray squirrels and fox squirrels. Squirrels are generally easy to find and they're easy to hunt. They make a lot of noise, and when they're running around in the trees, they wave branches and make a lot of visual signs as well. So it's easy to find them, and really, if you know where squirrels live and it's available to hunt, it's highly likely that you're going to have an opportunity to kill one. To hunt squirrels, all you really need is whatever you would wear on a walk and a shotgun or a rimfire rifle. So popular shotgun loads for squirrels are going to be number 6 lead shot up to number 4 lead shot. And you can use a 12 gauge, you can use a 20 gauge, you can even use a 410, just depending on the range that you're shooting squirrels at. Or you can take a little bit more of a refined approach and shoot squirrels in the head with a 22 long rifle or even a little bitty 17 caliber rifle. Like I said, squirrel hunting is pretty simple. You can honestly just go for a hike through the woods and pay attention, and you'll likely find some squirrels. You can also still hunt squirrels, and still hunting just means walking slowly and then taking long pauses and listening and using your binoculars to glass and look for squirrels, and then walking slowly again. And that can be very, very effective, especially if you're in the right sort of area. Or you can just sit down in a promising area and wait. And chances are, at some point, a squirrel is going to give itself away. I always think of deer hunting, where I would be sitting in the forests of Tennessee, and it felt like anytime I heard an animal approaching, it was likely a squirrel. And then if there was an animal that caught my eye that I didn't hear approaching, it was probably a deer. So if you just sit down and wait, often squirrels will reveal themselves by rustling around in leaves or jumping from branch to branch in trees or making a noise, and then you can go after them. Good squirrel habitat usually consists of tall, mature trees. Often there will be water nearby and a good food source like acorns or hickory nuts. I really don't want to overcomplicate squirrel hunting for you. I think the one thing to know is that they do taste very good. At least gray squirrels and fox squirrels taste wonderful. They work well in pretty much anything you would use chicken in. So if you just want to fry the squirrel legs, or if you want to put it in a chicken noodle soup, man, those are great ways to eat squirrel, and it really is delicious. I might have to do a whole podcast on squirrel hunting because really it's just so much fun. But for today, we will move on to our next hunt. For mixed coniferous forests, I chose grouse hunting. If you live in the Pacific Northwest or some of the Rocky Mountain West states, even as far over as the Midwest, you may be familiar with grouse. And grouse are just some of my favorite birds. They're silly. They're kind of like chickens, but a little bit ditzier, I guess. And they like to hang out in little family groups. They will just spend most of their time walking around on the ground, but then you'll be hiking and occasionally one will just blow out from seemingly right below your feet. And they can really scare you when you're walking around, especially if it's like late evening, it's getting dark and you're in bear country, and then a grouse just takes off right at your feet. At first, you think you're getting attacked and this is really the end. And then you realize it sounds like a helicopter, and then you realize it was a grouse and everything's okay. Anyway, they're super fun birds, and one thing that kind of makes them easy to hunt is their tendency to go to gravel roads. They go to gravel roads because they need grit for their crop to help them digest. And so they will live in these, dense forested areas, but then they come out to gravel roads, especially in the mornings and evenings, to get some grit to help them digest. And that's a really easy way to find them as a hunter. So grouse hunting, more than almost any other type of hunting, is a lot like hiking, because you can go out to some old timber company land and just choose a road that goes through the right habitat, and you can have plenty of opportunities even just sticking to the road. And so that makes it very accessible for new hunters and for people who might be familiar with hiking and camping, but not necessarily navigating through unmarked country. Grouse are also easy to hunt because often you can use a shotgun or a rimfire rifle. In fact, here in Idaho, you can use pretty much anything. I'm sure there are restrictions, but you can use handheld projectiles, meaning you could throw a rock at it or a stick or a trekking pole. You can use a slingshot if you want to, but most people are going to use some sort of shotgun or a rifle. And so a rifle would be for hunting grouse that are on the ground or that have flown up into a tree. You can use a .22 long rifle. You can even use a pistol that's chambered in .22 long rifle. That's another popular option. And If you come upon a grouse that hasn't flushed, you can shoot it. You can also shoot grouse that haven't flushed with a shotgun, but shotguns are more popular for when the grouse is flying and you try to knock it out of the air. And a 20 gauge shotgun is a great way to go. A 12 gauge shotgun, you can use number 6 lead shot. Pretty much anything you can use for other upland birds or small game, you can kill a grouse with. So, what are some strategies for hunting grouse? Well, like we talked about, walking logging roads early and late is a really great place to start. And if you're in an area with grouse, you're likely to see them on the side of logging roads or hear them. You might hear them drumming, which is this really low sound that sounds kind of like a giant bouncy ball that's bouncing really fast, but it's very low. It's like in the chest. And it's them drumming their wings. And so you'll pick up that sound sometimes. Sometimes you'll hear their little whistle sound. But all that to say, if there are grouse in the area, it's likely that you'll see one just hiking or driving logging roads. Now, if you want to narrow down where you look for grouse, you should look in wet, moist areas that are near water sources. Sometimes they're called riparian areas. Or if you're kind of higher up on a mountain, you might look on a north face where it's a little bit more shaded and lush and wet. And ruffed grouse and blue grouse tend to hang out in those wet areas. You'll also want to look for mixed forest areas and early regrowth. They need those areas for cover and food. And one tree that is closely associated with grouse is the aspen. If you find aspen trees, you're likely to find grouse in the area. And so those are always a great tree to hone in on. Just like with squirrels, grouse hunting is not too complicated, so go out and try it. I think you're going to have a great time. All right, for open farmlands and grasslands, I chose pheasant hunting. Pheasant hunting is a little bit trickier than grouse and squirrel hunting because it can be a little bit more challenging to get the pheasant to actually flush. So if they have good cover, there's a chance that you could walk right past a pheasant and it will just stay put. So a lot of people will use dogs to hunt pheasants, but you can still hunt pheasants without a dog, and the strategy is pretty simple. For gear, you just need a shotgun, maybe a 12 gauge shotgun with 4 shot or 5 or 6 shot. Anywhere in there will do you good. You may want some tough pants so that you can walk through brush without getting tangled up. And sometimes tall boots can be helpful just because you may be walking around in sort of marshy areas. But if you don't have tall boots, if you just have any old hiking boots, those will do, and you can definitely get out pheasant hunting. Pheasants take cover in weedy and brushy areas adjacent to a food source. So a classic area would be the edge of a cornfield, for example. And so you can catch the pheasants going out into the field in the early mornings and late evenings to feed, and then they'll retreat back into their cover during the day. So usually a good place to hunt them is going to be along the edges, and then during the day, actually in that brushy, thick stuff. They will also usually be near some sort of water source. So marshy areas or places with cattails can also be good pheasant habitat. To hunt pheasants, you're basically going to go for a hike. You're going to walk those field edges. You can zigzag through cover and try to kick pheasants up. And it also helps to go in a start and stop rhythm. So you walk and then stop and wait for maybe 30 seconds. And the start and stop rhythm can make them think that you're onto them and actually make them flush. And that gives you an opportunity to shoot them as they're flying away. So really it's just finding the places where they're hiding or where they're feeding and then walking through and making them flush. If you have multiple people, you can spread out in a line side by side and then walk slowly through those areas. And that can be an effective way to flush pheasants, even if you don't have a dog. The hunt I chose for the high desert is chukar hunting. And out of all the hunts we've talked about, chukar hunting may be the hardest, just because it can be so physically demanding. They live in rocky, steep areas, and chances are you're going to hike miles and miles to find a covey of chukar. But that being said, it still only requires some traction on your footwear and a shotgun. And besides that, you likely have everything you need to hunt chukar already. To be completely transparent, I haven't hunted chukar specifically myself, though I've flushed many of them when I've been out elk hunting in central Washington. So I understand the areas that they live in, and I did a little research that I can pass on to you guys. So when you're hunting chukar, you're especially going to look for rocky outcroppings on steep slopes, and that's where they take shelter. And chukar feed on seeds and young grasses, especially cheatgrass. Cheatgrass is an invasive grass, and chukar really like eating the young shoots of grass and then also the seeds. One of the main limiting factors for chukar is a water source. They need some sort of stream or some sort of man-made water source like a guzzler to drink from. So you are always going to find chukar in proximity to a water source. So it's not a bad idea to find your water source, then look for the steep, rocky outcroppings, and then find a food source. And if you can find all those three things together, you're likely to find some chukar. One tip that I've learned is that chukar often flush downhill. They will fly downhill, and then when they land, they will quickly walk uphill. And when they're running away from you just on the ground, they will likely walk uphill as well. So it's easier to climb high up and then hunt down than it is to hunt up a slope. If you're hunting up a slope, there's a good chance that they're just going to walk away from you and stay out of range. Also, if you flush a covey of chukar, there's a good chance they will fly downhill, and then you can mark where they land. And even if they fly a good ways away, if you can see where they land in that open country, you can then work around the hill and try to come down from above where they landed. And there's a good chance you will meet them as they're walking up the slope, or if they're still in that area, you can come down on top of them. That's going to give you your best chance at getting a shot. Another thing I've learned is that chukar will often be in the same elevation band on a slope. So if you find a covey of chukar, stay in that same general elevation and work along the slope instead of going much higher or much lower. Finally, when you're hunting chukar, be careful because they will lead you into some steep, rocky places, and you just have to make sure that you're not going somewhere that you can't get out of or that is too dangerous and could lead to you falling and hurting yourself. Okay, well, those are 4 low pressure hunts that just about anybody can get into. Whether you're a brand new hunter or a seasoned hunter, all you really need is some good footwear, a weapon, and a will to go out and put the miles in. Now, I said that turkeys get an honorable mention, and turkeys are another very widespread species that is very easy to hunt. And I mean easy as in there's not a lot of gear required. You can go out for half a day. It's not a big commitment the way maybe elk hunting or even deer hunting might be. Turkeys didn't quite make my list because they can actually be very elusive, and especially when they're in flocks, they can be hard to get on. And also, a lot of the culture around turkey hunting has to do with calling them in. And that's a skill that takes some time and practice to learn. So, despite being a great hunt for beginners, it just wasn't one of the simplest hunts that I could think of. One reason I would recommend turkey hunting, though, is that it can play out a little bit more like a big game hunt. And it's a nice place to bridge the gap between not much strategy of just walking around and trying to kick animals up and the highly strategic practices of finding big game animals. So, turkey hunting is a great way to step up your game if you're looking for something a little bit more challenging. All right, well, I'm about ready to wrap it up for today, but I want to leave you with a final thought. Hopefully, this has all been helpful for you and maybe given you some ideas of hunting opportunities in your area. One thing I've noticed, though, is that new hunters often aren't that interested in hunting small game. Often, new hunters are more motivated by big game, like deer or elk, or even bears, whatever it is. And that makes sense because there's a bigger reward and there's more of an adventure aspect to it. And I think it just captures the imagination. So if that's you, first of all, I would encourage you to branch out a little bit and start where you can, start learning even the simple things of small game hunting. But secondly, don't be afraid to follow your motivation. If it's really deer hunting that gets you excited, start learning about deer hunting. And I think that if you're a reasonably competent person, you can get out deer hunting even on your own, and you will be able to be successful. I've done all sorts of episodes on deer hunting in the past, so if you want a place to start, go check out those episodes. And once again, do something that motivates you, because that's going to take you so much farther than trying to struggle with something that's just not that exciting. So I'm not saying that small game hunting isn't exciting. I think all of these hunts are fun and exciting hunts to go on, and everybody who has the opportunity should give them a try. With that, I will wrap this up. Happy hunting, everybody, and I will catch you on the next one.